Hi class, so this is a quick recording just to show you guys the basics of setting up a low poly character or building a low poly character within Maya. I'm actually using Maya LT 2019, but it's basically identical to what you'll be using in the class for the student version of Autodesk Maya 2019. So don't be alarmed at that if you see that at the top. In regards to starting a low poly character and working within Maya, one of the things, and one of the requirements of the project was to make sure that we were above 1200 tries. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about triangles in our objects. And you can look at that right here in this tries count, right? So right now it's 0. And to get this menu to see if you're in the allocatable triangles, just go up to Windows. So Windows, let's see. No, I'm sorry, Display. My bad, not Windows. Display, Heads Up Display, and then in here, you're going to go down to Poly Count. So if I turn that off, you'll see that's not there. But if I go to Display, Heads Up Display, Poly Count, you'll see that that's there. And I like to keep that open while I'm working just to see, give me an idea of how many polys are in my scene. You can either go by polygons or triangles. I'm just old school, so I go by triangles, but that gives me a pretty good indication of where I stand. So, what we're doing for this project is low poly, and the only requirement is really to stay above 1200. So just keep an eye on that, and you'll get there pretty quickly. Okay, when I start and your scene's open, usually what I like to do is open my modeling toolkit, and you can find that on the tab within Maya on the side. If it's not open, just go to Modeling Toolkit, click that open, and keep this open. There's just some really good tools in here that help you as we start building our models, okay? So just keep that in mind. There's also some really nice symmetry tools we can get into later, but for now, we're gonna make sure that symmetry is turned off. If that's on, just make sure that's off, and then we'll get back to that. Let's see, is that about it? Okay, just a couple of things of note. On the side right here, we've got our outliner window. This will let us know what's inside our scene. You can always just open that and close that with this little icon right here. It's kind of like the layers. If you think about that in Photoshop, this would be just all of the objects that exist within our scene. And with that, let's get started. And again, just to recap really quickly, if you need to change scenes, just hit the space bar. Spacebar, 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 spacebar. You see wherever I hover over is where I'll go. All right. So I'm just hitting spacebar. If I hold it down, that gives me more options, but we don't need to do that right now. We just need to toggle around to the different views if needed. So if I am switching views, which I will be, I'm just hitting spacebar. Okay, so to get started, whenever I'm doing a low poly character, I always like to start with a cylinder. Cylinder is a great starting point for the torso of your character. I'll just create like a low poly male character, just a really basic base mesh for us to use, and you can make this to whatever you want. The same principles apply whether you're doing female, male, whatever, creature, doesn't matter. A cylinder, if it's a bipedal character, is a great starting point to actually create the character from, at least to your low poly models. When I'm starting, you'll see I just created a cylinder. I'm going to come over to my attribute editor, and in here, I'm going to look for the poly cylinder settings. This is the second one right here. And you'll see it gives me some history of this poly cylinder that I created. In here, we're going to change the subdivisions because we're doing low poly. 20 is okay if we're doing a little high poly, but for what I like to do, I like to keep it at 12. It makes it a little simpler and easier to do, kind of like old school box modeling, which is basically what you guys are learning right now. So I like to keep it at 12, and then my height, I like to crank that up to probably about 6. That just gives me something to work with, right? So again, I create a cylinder, then I come into my polycylinder history under my attributes, and I turn my subdivisions down to 12 and my height up to 6, okay? And this just gives me some geometry to play with. So now I can actually start forming this into a torso. So I'll just come into, let's say, my scale tool right here, and I'll just start stretching this out, kind of forming this into what is eventually going to be my torso. And remember, anytime you're working in Maya, you want to make sure that the object that you're creating, this is the front of your object. So your Z axis right here, this blue handle, if you click on your object, you'll see that. And you look down here, this is the handle, the Z pointing forward. Game engines, or especially Unity, works with that principle where Z is forward. So just remember that if the Z is pointing forward, you're modeling in the right orientation. Okay, so just stretch this out a little bit just to kind of make it more of like a torso. And I'm just kind of shrinking it in a little bit like that. Now what I'm going to do is in my modeling toolkit right here, I'm actually going to go into my symmetry settings right here, symmetry, and I'm going to do object X. And that's really important to make sure that our model is pointing in the right direction. So we'll be working on the X axis, which is this right here, right? So you'll see if I go into vertex mode and I click on a part of my model, you'll see the other side gets selected as well. Now I haven't moved this around. This has just been it has to be in the center of the stage that you're working in. So it's on the 0, 0 axis, and you can see as I click things, it also selects it on the other side. And this only works for objects that are in the the 0, 0 XY axes of your world, and are also transforms are frozen. And by that you can check if you click on your object and go up to your channel settings and make sure those are all zeroed out, the translations. Scale is fine, we're going to be messing with that, but just the translations. So we can go back to our modeling toolkit. We turned our symmetry on to object X. Now in here, if I go and you'll see I kind of have this fade going on. That's just the B key. That's the soft select, right? You see if I hit B, if I turn on, you'll see it on. If I hit it turn off, B, it goes off, right? So I'm just hitting the B key as in brush, right? So if I hold down the B key, right, and I click and drag, I can actually change the size of that influence of the soft select, right? And again, if I hit B off, it goes off, turn it back on, it goes on. If I hold it down and click and drag, it'll let me change the size. Okay, so in here, I'm actually going to start forming this into the shape of what is going to be the torso of my character. So I've increased the brush size to get a little more influence. You see what it grabs, right? Yellow is the most influence, then orange, then red, then nothing, right? So you can see like kind of where it's grabbing. So from here, I'm just going to kind of grab the center here and start just kind of just influencing the shape of this cylinder to kind of give me more of a torso-like appearance, right? And it's good having this symmetry on because you can really kind of dial in these nice edge loops and flows for how the character will be constructed. And again, I'm just coming in here and moving these around. You'll see that I have symmetry on it. It really lets me work on both sides very, very quickly and efficiently. I can come in and start shaping out. Okay, this is where the waist is going to be. Here's my lower back. Push that in a little bit. And you just kind of finesse the model to try to get it to where it needs to be. And again, I'm just coming around and clicking these verts to kind of look at the shape of my model here and just get its size to feel more like a torso. All right. This is where the chest is going to be. You've got your ribs. It's kind of your abdomen. If you ever need any reference or help, it's a good idea to go to like Google and just type in like, I like to do like Hogarth anatomy or even just comic book anatomy, just looking at how, how a torso is constructed. It'll really help you in terms of just, sculpting in general or modeling in general, making sure your proportions are correct on how, a human body looks. But, if you're doing a creature or whatever, then you can kind of play around with it. I'm adding a little bit of extra dynamism, I think, into the actual anatomy, just to give it a little more flair. I've got like my shoulder blades, chest, and abdomen, right? So once I'm about right here, that's a pretty good point to start working on our upper torso, where the neck and the the traps are going to be, which is like right up here. It's going to go feed into the neck, and then we'll eventually do the head. We'll stitch that on later, but that's a pretty good point to actually start doing the traps and the neck, right? So I'm going to come up here, I'm going to turn my symmetry back to off. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to very carefully extrude upwards into a neck shape. So I'm going to turn my soft select off. You'll notice if you have your soft select on and you try to extrude, it'll grab the extrusion as well, so it won't really effectively let you extrude the way you need to. Whereas if you turn it off, you can just extrude, extrude, extrude. Now there's two ways to do it. One, you can just hit the extrude button and then pull upwards, right? That's one way. And then I'm going to go ahead and shrink this down. And I'm being careful not to move it back and forth on the X, just up and down and forward, right? Using my scale tools in the middle to kind of get it to where I need it to be. Okay. Now the other way to do it is just to hold down the Shift key. Instead of clicking this, you can hold down Shift. You'll see it says extrude when you do that, right? So if I hold down Shift and then scale, I can extrude without having to click the button. Typically, that's how I like to do it for each extrusion. And you really want to be careful not to extrude over an extrusion. Sometimes you'll extrude or you hit the extrude button twice and you didn't realize it, and then you've got extra faces on top of faces, and it just adds so much extra work because then you got to clean up your model. There's errors in your model. You never want to have faces on top of faces. It's one of the things you have to be very cognizant of. There's kind of a simple way to fix that. I'll show you later by merging vertices, but for now we're just going to keep working with this. Now I'm just going to hold down Shift. I'm going to pull up the neck. I'm going to slightly shrink that down a little bit, like that. You can see now I'm getting this nice neck shape. I'm going to hold down Shift again, bring it up, and I'm going to slightly turn that part of the neck right there and just scale it out like that. Right, so as you can see, this is where the base of the skull is actually going to connect to. Right, it's kind of why I give it that turn too, because the jaw and everything would connect right in there. That's where my head will eventually go. And also what I'm going to do is I'm going to just backspace and delete those faces that I had. Right? So it's a good idea to click off of your model from time to time. Just click over here and look at it, and you'll see like it looks kind of rough, right? It looks very, very hard poly. Now to get that smooth look, very, very easy way to do it is just go up to, click on your model or your shape that you're working on, go to Mesh Display, and then Soften Edges. You see when you do that now, you get this really nice smooth look, okay? When you're doing low poly modeling, this is key. You really, really need to work with your soften edges all the time. And we can get into more hardening edges and stuff, but I think in some of the lessons that we've been going through, they actually mention like how to harden and soften different edges. So play around with that. But if I'm doing organic stuff like characters, you can just click on the shape, go up to Mesh Display, and click Soften Edges. Super easy. Okay. So now I've got a good torso and a pretty good base to work from. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to cut the bottom of this torso out. So eventually we'll make our waist or our legs will connect. So I'm going to cut that out. And I'm going to work on the arms first. So I'm going to go back to my symmetry mode. And I'm going to turn that to Object X, just like we were doing before. Now, one of the things I like to do with my my arms is I want to make sure I have the right amount of edges for the arms that they go out. Now, this square, the reason I like to use 12 when I'm doing a low poly model is this square right here on each side. Just having these four faces is great to work with when you're extruding an arm out. But the one thing we got to do before we bring this out in an extrusion is actually kind of round it out a little bit so it's more like an arm shape, right? Or at least closer to it. So what I like to do is I'll come in here, I'll grab my vert tool, I'll put my brush on a little bit, and I'll bring it down slightly so it's a little easier to work with. And I'll just move these corner points like that to kind of get more of an arm shape, right? And because our chest is right here, I'm just looking at this geometry. I'm actually going to add another little edge loop in here, so when this arm bends, it's not pulling this so much. And that's easy to do. I'll just come into my mesh tools, go to my insert edge loop, and I'll put another one in right below the arm and the chest, right about there. You know, when this character bends eventually, you're going to want that extra geometry in there. So we've got this shape on the side for the arm right there. Now, the other thing I like to do is just do a reverse scale, and that'll help kind of even out the topology so it's not so rounded. It'll kind of pull it together, and I'll just kind of move it into itself. All right. Again, I can come in here and just kind of tweak the shape a little bit. Maybe bring that out a little bit more. And the wider you make these, the bigger the shoulders will be. All right. Something like that. Okay, so this is a good spot to extrude our arms from. I'm going to go ahead again and turn off my brush. And so the first thing I'm going to do is concentrate on creating the shoulder, kind of the initial pivot point for this arm that comes out. And easily enough, we're just going to come in here, grab the shift key. We're going to pull, whoops, that didn't work very well. Let me go back. Sometimes it'll do that. It gets kind of messed up. Well, shift key, oh, does not like extruding in our, let me do this. Let me try using the, okay, it does like extruding with the actual extrude function, so that'll work. Okay, so I'm in here, extruding this out. I'm going to extrude again. Usually give myself like 2 extrusions right there to build that shoulder. Let's go ahead and bring that in. Then we go ahead and extrude again for the bicep. About right there. I'll go ahead and extrude again. And then I'll scale that part down to kind of close out that bicep, right? So super simple, right? We've got our shoulder, we've got our triceps and our biceps, this part right here. Now we're going to work on our elbow. And the elbow, I usually just do 3 loops. So we already have 1 loop there, which is this one. All right, I've got my edge tool. This loop that goes all the way around, right? That's our first loop, right? So we basically just need to create 2 more sections to create 3, like just like the shoulder, right? We have 1, 2, 3. Right? And we get our elbow to connect to our forearm. We're going to go 1, 2, 3. We're going to add another one. So I'm just going to come in here and get my face tool. Okay, hold on, my shift key. 1, 2, shift again, 3. Okay. And the reason we do that is when we eventually skin these models and animate them and put a rig in them, having those edge loops there, even for a low poly model, this allows the arm to flex, right? So these, you know, when it flexes, these are going to move, right? These are going to go like that, right? So you need to have these extra loops in here so you're not just pulling all this geometry. You just need to add a little bit. Now this is low poly. If I was doing high poly, I'd probably add like 5 or 6 in here. But, you know, for low poly, that's totally fine. And you can see also, based on our model right now, we're at 450 tries, right? And we've got the torso and the arms kind of going. We don't have the head yet. We don't have the legs, but there's a lot going right here. Okay, so I'm going to come back to my arm right here. And I'm going to hold on the shift key. And I'm going to extrude this out. Kind of down to where the wrist would be. So we'll go right about there. I think it's pretty good. And we'll go ahead and scale that down. And make it a little flat, like a wrist. Right, something like that. Then I'll go ahead and add some edge loops in here to kind of create the definition for the forearm, right? So I'll come in here, my mesh tools, and I'm going to go to my insert edge loop right here, and I'll put one right about there, and just kind of, oops. Expand that open like that. Then I'm going to go ahead and put another one right about there. That'll help kind of close that wrist out, right? So you can see very quickly you start getting a little more definition in the arm. Now I'll just come in here and start doing some detail work on the arm. And that's just with my soft select, right? I grab verts and so I'll pull out an elbow a little bit right here. I'll pull out my triceps right about there. Have that go a little more up into the shoulder. Something like that. All right. Come in here and I'll pull my shoulder up a little bit, down more into the arm a little bit. All right, I'm just kind of working on just adding a little more definition to the model. Or if he's more of like a muscular character, this would probably be where you could go nuts with that. If you need to, add in more edge loops and things of that nature. Come in here. We'll tuck this in a little bit right there because that's where the arm's going to fold. And we'll just kind of round these out a little more. And we'll just kind of work on the pocket of the armpit a little bit. Something like that's pretty good. You can actually bring these in a little bit closer. And again, it's always a good idea to come back up to your mesh display because anytime you do work on a mesh, if you start extruding and things, it's going to ignore your soft, what do you call it, the soften edge, right? So you need to reselect your model, mesh display, soften edge, and that'll re-soften all those normals. So you can see now we're starting to get like a, a humanoid shape. We've got our torso, some arms, we've got some good areas to start building hands from. Right here, I like to come in and just cut these out. And remember, it's always a good idea to count your openings too. So right here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sides. So here's an 8-sided cube, right? So remember that when we create our hands, that we have an 8-sided cube here that we're going to need to stitch on. Knowing those points just makes your life easier. So I'll come in here, I'm going to delete that out. I know that those are 8 sides, right? This arm is 8 points around it. The neck has 12 because we started with a 12-point cylinder, so is the waist. Right? Okay, so for a head, super, super easy. We're just going to come in here, grab a sphere, and because we had 12 points around our, if we go into wireframe mode so we can see it, we had 12 points around our initial cylinder. This sphere, we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to come into our attribute editor, go to polysphere, and knock this down to 12. I'm also going to make the height 12 as well. That gives me enough to work with. Because I know if this is 12, then I can easily stitch it to the neck right here as well. So I'm going to bring this up. It's right about where the neck would be. Right about there. Back to my view. Now I can start shaping this sphere to be more like a human head. And again, we'll just make sure in our modeling toolkit that symmetry is on, which it is. Then I'm going to bring my soft select up right here. And I'm just going to shape this sphere into more of a head shape. And I want to make sure that when I'm pulling the chin, I'm not pulling right at the bottom here. I'm pulling a little bit more right there. We can always add more geometry in there, but that'll let me cut out this bottom and stitch it right to this neck, right? So I'm going to come here, and I'll just mess with my brush settings to kind of get more or less the shape of a head. Now, I'm not going to go crazy in the details for this head. I'll get into that later, but we'll just use a sphere for now to do it. And I don't expect you and your characters to go crazy with the detail in your face. I just want the basics in there. And this should help you kind of get there. Let's see. So I'm just kind of just tweaking this up a little bit. Okay. It's pretty good, pretty decent for a head shape. It's a little high, so I'll bring it down right about there. About where the head would sit. I'll pull that chin out a little bit more. Okay. So now where it's at, I'm going to go ahead and actually bring this this head up a little bit. And what I'm going to do is, let's just see where that cut point is. Let's see here. Okay, so we're going to cut out this bottom area right here. Cut that out. And we're going to kind of fillet this open a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and bring my vert tool in here and just bring my brush settings down. And all we're going to do is just kind of get this open a little bit more so we can stitch it easy into this neck. You see where the neck is? We kind of want to get it just along the lines of that shape. It just makes it a little bit easier. And I know I might be going a little fast in this video, so feel free, to stop and play and rewind and watch it at the speed that works for you. I'm just trying to get through it so you have everything here to help you out. So I'm coming in here. There we go. That looks pretty good. I'm going to pull this out a little bit more. That's looking pretty good. Okay. So I'm just going to bring this down here, about right to where the head is. About there. That's good. Now, to connect this head, you see we've got two models right now, right? We've got our sphere that we edited, and then we've got this body that I've been working on, right? So to connect this sphere to the body part, all I have to do is merge these two objects together. If I look in my outliner, you're going to notice I've got the sphere and the cylinder, right? What I'm going to do is merge these into one object, basically. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my head, and I'm also going to click on my body, and then I'm going to go Mesh, Combine, all right? Now you'll see it's combined the meshes into a new mesh, which is P-Sphere 2, whatever I call it right there. And I can change the name of that whenever I want if I go to my attribute editor and just call it a... No, it's not right. There you go. Call it a, I don't know, body, right? If I wanted to change that. These two, these are just empty histories from the original transforms that existed for those two objects. And it keeps those just in case you need to go back in history, but we're going to go ahead and delete those because we just don't need them in our hierarchy. And it might cause problems for us as we start moving further with the model. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on those and say delete. Oh, I'm sorry. Wrong way. Don't just try to delete those. Click on those two, edit, delete all by type. We'll just do history. That'll clear those out. If you start getting lots of empty groups in your hierarchy, that's just from, history from previous models you were working on. And a lot of times if you're merging things together and creating new models, it's good to get rid of those. Sometimes it's not, depending on what you're trying to do. But for this, we'll just clear those out and keep working with one single mesh, right? So I'm going to come in here and go to my modeling toolkit, and I'm going to look for target weld. This guy right here. Target weld's going to let us pull these verts into each other, right? So you look right here, we've got this one and this one that need to be connected, right? This one and this one, this one and this one, et cetera, right? And because everything is on the, the 0, 0 world, the symmetry still works too. So this is great for connecting stuff as well. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to go down to my target weld. First I'm going to take my brush off. Take that off. Now you'll see here, there's two ways to do this. One is the target and the other is the center. Now for a neck, I like to change it to center because that gives me kind of a median distance between where this is and this is. So when they connect together, it's not just like shooting over here. I'd rather have it kind of more in the center. So you'll see if I grab this one and pull it, just click and drag right to the other vert. And make sure that when you're doing this, you have the vert selected that you want to move, and you literally click and drag to the actual vert. Sometimes it'll try to get the one behind it or other things, and you just don't want that to happen. It's got to go right to the one you're going for. And you'll see that green dot between that weld line is where it's going to end up when it merges the two together, right? So I just click and drag. They're both highlighted. I let go. See how it brought those together? And I'm just going to go around this neck here and do the same thing. So I'm going to get this one, drag it here. 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 This one will go there. This one right there. Okay. So now our head is connected to our neck. Now our neck's looking maybe a little big here. So I'll just go ahead and marquee the whole thing, turn on my brush, or my soft select, and just maybe move that down slightly. I can also use a little sculpting on the neck. It seems a little thin. So I'm just going to come in here and pull these out a little bit. Like right about there. Or something more like that. That looks pretty good. And again, you can go crazy with the head later, but at least gives you a starting point, right? So we'll come in here, and I'm going to go to Mesh Display, Soften Edges. All right, so we've got our jawline, we've got our neck, and we've got some heads to work with. All right. So in this first part of the video, I'm just going to go ahead and do the hands next, and we'll end with that. And then I'll upload another video probably later this week to do the actual legs, but the same principles apply. I'll actually start doing the legs, and then we'll go from there, but I don't want to keep too long on this video. But there's a lot of good things in here already. I think that'll suit you in terms of creating your model. But in terms of finishing this out, let's go ahead and make a hand. Now, a hand, I'm going to go ahead and turn my symmetry off. Go to off. Whenever I'm making a hand on a model, I like to go ahead and create a box for my hand. So this will be the palm of my hand, right? I just dragged it right out of the model right there, right in the front. Now I'm not going to use symmetry. I'm just going to work on this. Remember we had 8 sides to the model, so I'm going to go ahead into my attributes, click on my cube. And to do that, I need to make some divisions between this. So we just need 2 divisions. 2, because we have 4, right? So we just need to double that up. 2 and 2. Whoops. So there we go. We've got 2 like that, right? Now, because we're working with a hand, actually, you know what? The height, we'll go ahead and do a little trick I have. We'll go ahead and make it just like that. So 2, 1, 2 in your divisions. 2 wide, 1 high, and 2 depth. And I'll show you why. This is just kind of a little trick I've learned. But if we start this way, go ahead to the side right here and turn my divisions off. And I just extrude outwards 2, 1, and 2, right? I now have 4 spaces that I can connect my fingers to, which is really important, right? Hands are one of the most difficult things to model when you're doing characters, just so I like to start. Something like that is a really good starting point if you're building a low poly hand. Like this totally works, because then you can do a really simple 3-finger model right here with 1 for like a trigger finger or a pointer finger. You come in here, do something like this. So we'll grab these 3 right here, and we'll go ahead and extrude outwards. Remember, anytime you're working with a hand, if you're ever having problems, just look at your own hand. And you can see, fingers, they have 3 segments, right? So we've got our first segment right here. And remember, this is 3 fingers, and this is low poly, so they can be connected together. We could texture it to make it look like they're 3 fingers. So I'll come in here, do something like that. Or maybe bring it out a little bit to spread it away from the main finger. I'll come here. And again, think about the elbows, right? We do the same thing for knuckles on fingers, right? We'll go ahead and extrude outwards. And I'm just kind of turning it, extruding it, and turning it as I go. Right, so we've got our first segment, and we got our second segment right here. Go ahead and extrude again. You can go ahead and kind of bring these into each other a little bit like that. And then we'll go ahead and extrude again. Extrude again. All right, it's looking like a pretty good hand. And then we're going to go ahead and extrude out the tips of the fingers. All right. And this we can really kind of bring this together. Now for the fingers, now you always want to make sure that, you know, they're closer to a normal hand. So our middle finger, right, would be a little bit longer than the other, so you can just kind of do something like that. If you really want to get extreme, you can really start messing with it in terms of, you know, proportions and how's everything laid out, but this is pretty good to start. Okay. Now for our main finger, or our pointer finger, we're going to do the exact same thing, right? I'm going to click here, and I'm just going to bring this out. I'll try to match the other ones as close, but they don't need to be exact, just close. All right. Again, I'm just using the shift method to extrude it out and just build this little index finger. All right. So you'll notice a lot of games will do this approach, especially if they're like top-down games where the character's like that big on the screen and you'll never ever see those individual fingers. They'll be connected for sure. It's just an optimization technique that is very widely used. Let's come in here with this last part. We'll just curl it up a little bit like it's something like that. And close it out a little bit like that. All right. So we've got our, our 3 fingers plus our main index finger, right? Now, if we were actually doing this correct, we'd probably have these all straight. And we'll get into that later. But for now, the purpose of modeling and creating a model, this is fine. We can always change that later. Even when we rig it, we can actually pose it correctly and then, snap the pose to the right position for a humanoid model for Unity and work on all that later. But for now, just getting the look of it, this is fine. And I'll come in here and just kind of shape this out a little bit. And what I'll do is I'll bring these down right to about there. Bring that right there. What I like to do to kind of insinuate knuckles is just pull up these 2 edges like that. Even though there's 4, when you texture it to 4, but just having those slightly raised kind of gives the illusion of knuckles. Then from here, we can actually craft our thumb. And the thumb has 3 sections as well. There's a big base section that's really kind of short and stumpy, and then 2 longer sections, right? So kind of like the fingers, except this part would be a lot shorter, but kind of big and wide, right? So what we do is we take this piece right here, and it's also pointed kind of out and in, right? So it kind of goes like that. Okay, just think of like a V, right? There's your thumb. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to kind of mess with this side right here, and I'm going to turn this. just like that. All right. And even kind of pull it open a shade to build this base of the thumb. And I'm also going to turn it like that a little bit. So kind of downwards and kind of in on itself. And I'll go down a little bit more with it, like that. Okay. That's just how I do it, but it always works pretty well for what I try to do. Okay, so down here, we're going to go ahead and basically bring this rectangular shape down into more of a square shape. So what I'm going to do is shift. And this is my pivot point. So this part's actually going to be small, but this is where we'll actually bring this rectangle back into more of a square shape, right? So come down here to something like this. Whoops. And again, I just want 3 edge loops. I don't need a lot because it's a low poly character. I'll go ahead and bring this down again. Every time I'm doing it, I'm just making it a little bit smaller. All right. So you see there's the base of my thumb right there. That works pretty well. And I'll go ahead and make my 2 segments. So I've got this part of my thumb right here. It's about as long as the segment on your finger right there. And I'll go ahead and again make my knuckle on this. Just straighten this up a little bit. Extrude another segment right there. Extrude another segment right there. Right. I'll bring in the last segment right here. Finish out this thumb. And we can bring that up a little bit. And I'll go ahead and bring that in. All right. There we go. Kind of something more along the lines of that for the thumb. So we've got 2 main segments, and then we've got this base segment for the base of the thumb. All right. So in the rig, this would allow this to move, kind of flex in on itself, and then we have this part to kind of collapse in on whatever we're holding, etc. Right. And the reason I do it this way too is this allows for less bones in the rig when we actually get into rigging. So you have your main rig for your finger, and then another rig for these bones, and then another one for the thumb. So you only have 3 bones instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bones, right? So you're saving yourself. But you don't need to worry about bones yet. That's down the road. Okay, so there's my hand, right? Pretty simple. I've got my hand object. Now I'm just going to scale it down and turn it face the appropriate direction. I'll kind of give it kind of like that, so it's not 100% forward, kind of something more along the lines of that. Get it to right where that wrist starts, right about right there. So now all we need to do is connect this hand to the open wrist, right? But again, since we initially started with 8 segments on this wrist, we need to go ahead and convert the end of this to those 8 segments as well. And very easily we can do that by just, we're going to go ahead and pull out one more segment, and we'll go ahead and weld some verts together. So I'm just going to shift, extrude another segment. Go ahead and turn this so it's aligned to where I need it to be. And I can also just kind of bring it up a little bit. I might go for the whole hand too. Yeah, something like that's good. Okay. I go ahead and on the back of this hand, I'm going to cut out all these faces. And again, I need to get to 8, right? So I need to get rid of some of these verts. So what I like to do is just go inwards. You will have some triangles, but it's very, very, I mean, you really don't notice them. If I come in here, go to my modeling toolkit, I'm just going to target weld. I'm going to bring these to the target this time. So I'm going to go right to the center, bring these verts right to the center, this one right to the center. All right, so now I've got 1 and 2. And on the bottom, right to the center, right to the center. All right. So I should have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, that's not right. Hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I have 6. So I need to make a couple more on the side right here. And this is where we use our multi-cut tool in the modeling toolkit, right? So in here, I'm going to come to my my multi-cut tool. I'm going to go ahead and click this vert right here. And then I'm just going to go ahead and create a new vert right in the center right there and hit enter. Okay. Same on this side. I'm going to go ahead and click that vert, go right to the center, and enter. All right. So now I have my 8 sides. Okay. Now I'm going to do exactly what I did before, but before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this hand onto the other side. So because I moved my hand into this area of the scene, you'll notice the translations have changed, right? Now it's no longer in the 0, 0 axis. It's over, 9, 1, 77, etc., right? It's been rotated. It's got scales. It's got all kinds of things going on. What we want to do is we want to zero all this out and bring its transform to the center of the world, but leave the hand here, okay? And the reason we're going to do this is because we're going to duplicate it or mirror it to the other side and then merge those together. So the way to do that is once you have your hand selected, we're just going to come up to window. Oh, I'm sorry, not window. What is it at? Modify. And then we're going to go freeze transforms. Now, once we freeze it, you'll see it zeroes everything out. Even though it's over here, all the transforms are zeroed out, right? If we were to bring this into Unity, it would be in the center of the world, right? Even though we're working on it right there, it has 0 translations. It's thinking it's at the center of the world, even though it's not, right? Then we're going to go modify, reset. Now, when you reset it, it actually uses the center of your scene as its pivot point, right? So you see now, even though our hand's over here, its pivot point is right there. So if I were to duplicate it or mirror it, it would mirror directly where it is on the other side of the model. Now this is super important for symmetry, right? We want to make sure we duplicate it and it shows up right on the other side, okay? So what I'm going to do is now that I have it there, and this is in the center of the world, I'm going to go edit. I'm going to go down to duplicate special under the edit menu, but I'm going to click the little options box, right? Now in here, this might not be set, or it might be, but what we want to do is we want to scale it negatively on the x-axis, right? Because we can go to the other side. So it's at 1 right now. We want to make sure it's scaled in the negative to the other side, right? So all we have to do is put a negative in front of the x, right? Remember, you got your 3 columns here. You got x, y, and z, right? -1 on the x, okay? And we're not going to do an instance. We're going to do a copy, okay? And we're just going to say duplicate special. All right, you see now when I did that, I've got p cube 1 and p cube 2. Now the only difference between these two, even though they're on the other sides of the model and they're reversed and mirrors of each other, is now this one still has in its scale settings a negative scale. So technically it's inside out, right? It doesn't look like it in Maya right now, but if you were to bring it into a game engine, it would look at that scale value and say, oh, I'm -1, and it would be like inside out of each other, because you basically what we did is we scaled, right, this just like that. We went backwards in its scale, right? So it was at 1, and then we brought it all the way to -1, right? So that's what we did, right? So what we need to do is clear that out, and that's easy. We'll just come up to, we'll click the new hand, p cube 2. Then we'll just go to modify, freeze transformations, and that'll give us our normal scale. So now it's no longer like a reverse scale. Okay? So now I got to click both these hands I just made, go to Mesh, Combine, right? Now I have combined hands. I'm going to go ahead and delete these transforms out of here. So I'm going to go to Edit, Delete All By Type, History, just to clear that up. So I have my body and my hands, right? I'm going to click both. I'm going to go Mesh, Combine again. And then I'm going to go Edit, Delete All By Type, History. All right. So now that I have these all connected, this is one mesh, I could come in with my target weld. And they have to be one combined mesh to use the target weld, right? So I'll come into my modeling toolkit. And I'll go down to my target weld. I'm going to click center, just like before. And I'm just going to start pulling these into each other. That. Just go around my hand right here. There we go. And I come in with my sculpt tool. Sculpt these out a little bit better. Just adding some extra detail in the actual hand itself. All right. Go to my object. Mesh display. Soften edges. There you go. So right now we've got our human with our torso and two arms, right? Now, basically just what we did for our hands, it's kind of the same principle you do for a leg. If you're creating a leg, you'd basically just use a cylinder, like so. Kind of get it the size of the leg that you'd want, something like that. You can either go into the attribute settings and add some more height subdivisions, or just come in with the mesh tool and add your edge loops. So I could do like my knee right here, my hip right there, and bottom of the foot where eventually the foot would connect right there. And then you could shape this piece however you need to. You know, bring it forward, shape it out, all that kind of stuff. And then once you're done, you'd cut out the top and the bottom, and then eventually stitch it to the body. All right. But what you need to do on your body if you're going to start adding legs is you need to create a pocket hole for those to connect to. And to do that, first you're going to have to design basically the crotch area where you'd have these holes to connect the legs to. So you'd come in here, and one way I like to do it is basically just grab the edges right here before the waist on this midline. I'm going to come in here, bring these together a little bit like that, kind of like where the abdomen would be. Turn off my soft select, and you have to make kind of almost like a lattice that goes all the way around, right? And it'll connect right here to the back side. So I'll just hold my shift key and literally just drag down. And as I go, I'll start shrinking it in a little bit. All right. Shift. Oh, whoops. All right, till I get right about there. And I'll grab the top and the bottom right here, and I'll just click in my modeling toolkit bridge, join those together. All right. Just make sure that that was done right. Yep. So now I've got basically these pockets to join my legs in. And from here, you'll just come in with your soft select and just kind of make your symmetry, put that back on. Just make sure that this is kind of rounded out so those legs can connect. Basically where the hip, the top of the leg would connect. You just kind of, you want to get these round pockets, right? And then for legs, you know, if this count the amount of edges that are in here, depending on what they are, you probably want to make your legs the same in terms of the circumference. But 8 or 12 is a pretty good bet. And then you can always, merge down if needed. But you make those pocket holes, you design your legs, and you connect them. So next video I'll upload tomorrow. We'll have, I'll do that whole process for the legs. But I think this is a pretty good start. If you guys are having issues with your models, I think follow along with this video. This should help you out, and then we'll go from there. Hopefully everybody's doing good on their assignments. You guys are doing a great job so far. So I just wanted to throw this together so you guys have something to work from for your characters. Look forward to seeing what everybody creates. Hope this helps. Thanks, guys.